Everybody got quiet, so we'll call the meeting to order at this time. It's our annual budget retreat, March the 23rd, 2022. I understand we are recording this. It has not been shown live. It will be available today's meeting sometime tomorrow and Thursday's meeting sometime on Friday. It will show up so the citizens can certainly look at it, or the press. And at this time, it is customary for us to begin all of our meetings with a prayer. And during this time, the visitors are welcome to stand and join us in the prayer. They're welcome to use this time for their own prayer or a moment of silence, whichever you see fit for. And at this time, I'd call on Mr. Fred Belfield for the invocation, and then Wayne Outlaw for the pledge of allegiance.
Let us pray. Life can be beautiful, beautiful. Yes, beautiful if you only believe in God. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Heavenly Father, we come before you in the name of your Son, Jesus, thanking you for this day. We pray that it will be a blessed day. We are here in our budget meetings, and Father, we pray that everything that's said and done will be pleasing in thy sight. Bless each and every one within the sound of my voice. And Father, we heard in the weather report that we may get some turbulent weather. Tornadoes are possible. We pray you calm the sea, and we pray that you calm the weather today. These blessings we ask in your name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Would you join us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Commissioner Marvin Arrington to tell us about the facility and introduce the people we have here today. Mr. Arrington.
Good morning, my fellow commissioners and staff, public. This morning we want to welcome you to Drake's Community Center, and you know this community center is part of a combination of the county helping us with the help of our past District 1 Commissioner Lou Richardson. She lobbied for us to have a community center for quite a while, and she got, along with the county, help us to accomplish that goal with some great grant writing. And today I have my board of directors here, and I want to officially introduce them this morning. On the left there, Donald Fobbs, stand up, and his grandfather was one of the founding members of our community, Drake's Community Development Organization. They always had a Drake's Community Club, and his grandfather was the first president. William Aaron is one of our board members, our vice chair. Oliver Doc Sesson, he's our chair. All right, Rosa Harrison and David Bowens. And Reverend Bowens will give an official welcome from the board.
Good morning. Good morning. Mr. Chairman of the Nash County Commissioners, and to all that is involved. We are Drake community, and we are welcome you, brother, this morning to Drake Center. We know the County Commissioners is the heartbeat of Nash County, and we are so proud to have you to come on your regular budget retreat this day. and we hope that you will have an enjoyable stay with us here at Drake. We hope as you make your decisions, those tough decisions, that you will keep Drake community in mind. We have a few problems. We have a water drainage problem, and we also have in mind a recreation park like in our community. So as you make those tough decisions, we hope that you will keep us in mind as you have in the past. So again, we hope you have an enjoyable stay here at Drake Center, and we hope you will come back real soon. Thank you.
At this time, I'm gonna turn it over to our county manager and actually leave it there for quite a while and let her, it means it is a retreat and not a commissioners meeting. If you're okay, I'm just gonna turn it over to you and let you take it from here.
Yes, sir. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the next 2 days. And really, the next 2 days is not about making a whole lot of tough decisions. I think that's my job as we move forward, to be able to get the budget where we need it so that I can present you with a balanced budget. But today's about providing you with a lot of information about the budget, and so you'll know what we're working with for the upcoming budget year. So the next item on the agenda is for our finance officer, Donna Wood, to share with you our year-end projections for the current fiscal year, and also what our revenue projections are for the upcoming year. And that is actually a little out of order, so we'll go ahead and just direct you to page 5 in your manual there.
Okay. So as you turn to page 5, we have just the item, our agenda item. This information is review of a set up by function of revenues and expenditures. It's provided to allow the board to see the overall estimates and expenditure requests, as well as our projections for the current, as we end the current fiscal year. And it's at a high level just to provide a detailed review from departments. So this is presented at a high level. So when our departments come in and present their more detailed review of their requests for our new positions, reclassifications, and capital, it will kind of give you an idea of where we are at this point in time. So if you'll just turn over to the page 7, this is our high-level review of our revenues. And I want to direct you to the column that says projection for 21-22, and that's where we'll start. What we're projecting at the end of the fiscal year is that we'll end, we budgeted, including fund balance, we budgeted $100,334,574, including fund balance. So at the end of the year, we obviously don't use fund balance as a revenue source, but we like to look at it in terms of hopefully our revenue will come in higher and we won't use that. We do have reserves from health department that we'll use, but we're projecting we'll end the year at $101,792,931. And then if you'll flip over to page 8 and look at that same column, we're projecting our expenditures by the end of the year will be $101,114,095, which will leave us in excess to put back into fund balance of $678,836. So that's what we're projecting right now, looking at where our tax collections are, our sales tax collections, our other fees, and where our expenditures are today. Now I want to, if you would, flip back over to page 7.
Can we ask the question?
Sure,
as you go,
absolutely.
Or does that confuse you?
Nope, no, please, go ahead, ask questions.
The expenditure side, when you get to the total there, 101, 114,
Yes.
Does, and the projected amount going back into fund balance, does that utilize in any fund balance in the budget or zero fund balance that we have?
It's using zero fund balance,
okay.
only the reserves from the health department.
That's what I thought, just wanted to make sure.
Yes.
Thank you.
And you can see, if you'll go back to that same level, property taxes, we're estimating they'll come in at 55,193,000. We like to budget our taxes conservatively. We base that on the estimated value provided by our tax administrator. And in the past, we've always used a collection rate of 97.5%. And as we all know, our collection rate is over 99%. So that's one way that we feel like we can protect ourselves and make sure that we're not overestimating our revenue. The other thing that we have always done in the past, when we budget our sales tax, we look at what we're collecting in the current year, our analysis of what we're collecting. We don't budget an increase in taxes, in sales tax collection, but as we're seeing prices increase, so sales tax will be increasing, but we are projecting at the end of this year, we'll end up at 19,866,000. It's a little off from our requested line item, but we typically request the same amount that we're projecting for year end. So that's really how we, moving over to the next column for the requested. Are there any other questions on the projections?
I noticed on page 7 where it says fees and other services, what's causing that minus 2.6%?
That is in the, that's for the requested for next fiscal year. And it could be looking at, I'm just trying to remember the detail, when we're projecting out our fees. We are looking at different things, you know, planning and inspections, a register of deeds fees, sheriff's offices. We try to analyze and look back historically and not overestimate in our requested amount because we may have an anomaly in a collection in one of those fees, and so we go back and look through and see if there was something unusual in our fee collection in the current year that we can't count on in the next year. So that decrease is actually when we budgeted the original budget in 2022, that's just where we're looking at what we've collected so far, and maybe we don't feel like we can get there in 2023. So that decrease is based on what we're estimating for next fiscal year.
And that estimate, is that because of the economic situation and plus the pandemic?
No, that could be, and I'm just trying to recall, that could be from that level. So for instance, if we received a large amount of planning fees for a specific project that we know we can't count on in the current fiscal year, the next fiscal year, we're not budgeting for that. You know, even when we do an analysis, we have to take out what I would call large and unusual items that we may have anticipated in 22 that we can't really count on in 23.
Well, I guess it's safe to not over budget.
Right. Now again, we have a big gap. Maybe that's where we want to go back and pick some more money up.
Could I ask just one question?
Sure.
To make sure I understand. So on page 7, the year-over-year increase in available revenue looks like it's 7.2%. Am I reading that right?
That is correct.
Okay, because I was thinking it was a little less than that. So it's 7.2%. So if you go to page 8 and look at the requested budget, then that is 16.6% increase. Does that exclude or include could you take the 7.2% out of that to reduce that number to 16.6, or the 7.2 on top of the 16.6?
So actually, it's probably a little bit less. My formula may be off.
I may not have said that before you.
No, I know exactly what you're saying. No, when we look at our difference, the 16 million is on top of that increase.
So if I look at the budget, the 7.2% is already dialed into the request. So the request above the available revenue is 16.6% additional.
Yes,
Okay. Thank you.
yes, thank you. Okay. So moving ahead to the requested budget, unless anyone has any other questions on projections. So what we're looking at in our requested budget right now, you know, we talked about the property tax and how we come up with that calculation, the sales tax, other taxes, that includes some of our ABC tax money, other taxes that we collect in there. And then the Health Department, Social Services, they're based on federal and state funding on their partial funding on some of their expenses. Other intergovernmental or other revenues that we receive from other agencies. And then fees and services there for our collections of, again, as we talked about, planning and inspections, register of deeds, sheriff's office fees, recreation fees, things like that. And our investment earnings are built into the other revenue. That as you move down further for other financing sources, we do have a small amount of reserves, of transfers in, which would come from, we still have a radio project debt service that we're paying on, and we have some fire districts that have a little bit more money that they owe the county back, and so that's where that $37,000 comes from. And then the reserves are actually offsetting health department expenditures. The health department has reserves from funds that they've received in the past that have to be spent specifically on health department expenditures, and they budget to use their reserves. So their local appropriation remains about the same every Mr. Hill tries very hard to make sure that the local appropriation stays about the same by using his health reserves.
Could I ask just one more question?
Sure.
On the 16.6%, do you know what percent of that, since you mentioned the Health Department, Social Services, would actually be state and or federal funding? In other words, I'm trying to determine of that 16.6% above revenue available, what percentage of that would be money coming from the state or the federal that would not come out of local money? Is that a fair question?
It is, and I believe right now,
I'm just trying to get a true picture for the actual county impact on the request.
sure, and I can break that down for you. So you're looking for what the local appropriation is from both health department and,
Well, I'm just looking in general, overall, what percentage of that 16.6 would actually be monies coming from state or federal that would just pass through the
well,
county?
and I might have to look at it a little bit differently.
Because what our concern would be what we're having to fund
Right.
directly.
So if you take, for example, social services, when we look at the local appropriation, I believe what they're requesting right now, that local appropriation has gone up. So part of that 16.7% is an increase in the Department of Social Services local appropriation. And based on what we have in the requested right now, I want to say it's about, I'm trying to remember what the increase is for the local appropriation. It may be about, I'm going to say 300,000 increase from what they have in there this year from what they had in there last year.
Of
So
the
that would make-
16.6%, I think it's gonna be a very small percent that we're gonna get
Right,
that revenue from
exactly.
somewhere.
So it
Yes.
would be a small percentage of the 16.6
Yes.
coming from state and federal.
That's correct.
Yeah, I would say no more than 1.5% at
Yeah.
the most. maybe.
Don, I've got a question also, just to go back. The percent change number, that's the difference between our amended budget for fiscal year '21 and the projected budget, or for '21-22 amended budget versus requested budget, the request that we're being presented with.
It should be the difference between our original budget
Okay,
and the requested.
so it's not the difference between our projection and the request.
That's correct.
Okay.
So if we move on to, does anyone else have any questions on the revenue? So if we move on to page 8 and look at expenditures, the way that we have started budgeting in our capital, we have a capital line item, and you can see last year for the original budget, we budgeted $1,743,963. This year in the requested budget, we have $9,683,490 of requests. And as our departments come and talk to us, they'll break down what's included in that requested number. Public safety, the request is, so also keep in mind that the original budget and the requested budget within each department does not include capital. As we move forward throughout the year and we get quotes and we move the capital into the departments, and that's why we want to focus on the original budget, because we do, if the capital is approved, as we get our purchase orders, we move the money into the specific departments. So we're looking at the same numbers, just salary and benefits and operational from original to requested. So, within public safety, the breakdown, and I just want to go ahead and let you know, if you looking forward on pages 11 through 13, it'll give you the breakdown of what's included in each area: general government, capital, general government, public safety, economic development, health department.
So all of these are broken down on 11 and 13?
They are. They're broken down by department. They're not broken down by line item, but they are broken down by department, so you can see what makes up each one of those higher level numbers. And so overall, with all of our requests and what we set aside a small amount for contingency, and the transfer to the other fund, that $200,000 is set up to transfer to our revaluation reserve. We have to, in the past, we've budgeted $100,000 to transfer, but we're having to do our revaluation a year ahead. And so we're increasing the amount that we're requesting to move to the revaluation reserve, because we want to make sure by 2024 we have $800,000 in that reserve fund, that special reserve.
Okay, I got one more question.
Sure.
Does this include, I know it can't because we haven't seen it, the salary study?
It does not include the salary study.
So the 16.6 or 7 on top of that would be any implication from the salary study?
That is correct.
Thank you.
What it does include, as I indicated, it includes the capital request, the $9 million in capital requests. It includes new positions, reclassifications that the departments are asking for. And they are built into each department, and that's when our department heads come this afternoon. That's what they'll be talking to you about, so you're aware of what is in the budget and what they're requesting in those larger amounts that is outside of what we would call our typical operations.
So in addition to the salary study, there may be some other things that are not included?
No, everything is included in here except the salary study.
Okay,
yes.
fine.
So the position requests, reclassifications, and capital are all included in the requested budget. We don't have any information to put in there currently for the salary study.
So you're saying, did somebody else start? Please go ahead.
The capital number, 9.6 million. You mentioned that throughout the year for typical capital projects, that money is moved into the department budgets.
Right.
So, like under our amended budget, we've got $779,000. Was that a bigger number at the beginning, and those numbers are now in the department budget, so it looks like a much smaller number?
Yes. So what we'll do, so you can see it was at 1.7 million as they've requested the money, and we actually get a quote for it. We have to get multiple quotes, or we use state contract, or prices change. We move that money from what's been approved into their budget. So you can see we've moved to date $779,000. Actually, the projection should end up 0, but we didn't want to go ahead and project what we were gonna put in the department's budget, but we did wanna show those expenditures, we're planning on those happening during the year.
So we're really like comparing last year, we budgeted 1.7 in capital
Yes,
versus the request now for 9.6.
Right.
That's a more accurate comparison.
yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Donna, you made the statement that it includes everything but the proposed salary study we are doing and the effect of that. So everything else the commissioners have heard about has been taken care of in this, and what I'm thinking about is just us looking at the shift change in EMS particularly and the proposed, and then expecting some kind of cost involved in that. Any money for that in here?
It is in here.
It is.
So the shift change that EMS is requesting, information, some things that the sheriff's office is requesting is in here. Parks and
Okay.
Rec changes are requested in here.
Okay.
Department of Social Services, when Amy spoke to the commissioners, her actual request is in here for new positions. So that's all included in the requested. This is everything that they're all requesting for the current year, excluding anything that may be part of the salary study.
All right, there's another example would be the commissioners have received a lot of information out of the office of the sheriff about additional pretty substantial increase in salaries. Is that included in here then?
It is,
Okay, all right, thank you.
it is. So what I'd like to do, I just wanted to go over a couple of points of what we're looking at. So on page 9, I just wanted to go over, my calculations must be wrong on my changes, but what we're looking at for revenues from the original budget of 22 to what we're looking at this year for the requested for 23. Our revenue is $5,893,624, higher than what we were looking at in the original budget for 22. Now again, that excludes fund balance appropriation. Just an overview of the increase, estimated increase in ad valorem taxes, $1,612. This estimate is based on an increase in assessed tax base. Last year, we were working with $7,984,000,000, and this year, the tax base, we were given an estimate from our tax administrator of $8,141,000,000. And as I indicated, we budget that based on a 97.5% collection rate. Estimated increase in sales tax, we're looking at $2,418,325. This is based on the fiscal year 22 year-to-date annualized collections, and what we're expected to increase, an expected increase over the prior year. As I indicated, this budget is based on the projected current year. The estimated increase also includes additional lottery funds of $1 million. When we received our needs-based grant of $10 million, we didn't think we'd have that money back until the end of 2023, and during 2023, and the state has decided to allow that money to come back to us for the second quarter. And so we're estimating that we'll be able to use $1 million towards Rocky Mount High School debt service.
How much sooner was that than projected to be? How many quarters?
I believe it's 3 quarters early. I think we were supposed to get the money back in October of 2023.
Gotcha. Okay, so 3 quarters early.
I believe so.
Shame they didn't do it quicker, isn't it?
It is. We lost a lot of lottery funds during those years. The other thing that we have in here is that we didn't have in prior year. We put in $1 million anticipating that we'll get $1 million from our hospital lease that we have. So they are just a higher level numbers that we were looking at, what we've added to the current year to allow for that estimated increase from 22 to 23.
The current budget we're in had $0 for hospital lease,
That's correct.
based on history. Okay. All
The medical emergency service budget that I'm looking at, does that include collections for the service?
It does.
It does not.
Are you talking about our ambulance fee collections?
Right.
Yes, sir, it does include that.
It-
That's included in that's part of the fees and other services. Included in that number. You can't, it's not broken down specifically, but we do have that in there. But again, we're not projecting any increases in our ambulance fee
Do you have
collection.
any idea what percentage collected or uncollected?
I do not, but I can work on getting that for you. We do send our uncollected to debt set-off with the state, so that is, we do pursue collection on that.
Yeah, I don't personally need that, but I was just wondering if you were keeping up with that, what percent. In fact, they ought to have that information, uncollected, what percentage of uncollected.
Okay,
Ambulance service.
It's done by a third party anyway, so I'm sure they would have that.
they
Yeah,
should.
They should.
We currently use
But
that.
I just think that it probably, maybe you ought to know that. They ought to be giving you that information.
So moving on to the expenditures, our estimated increase of expenditures over what we budgeted in prior year is 16,766,448, or 16.71%. And what's included in that number, part of the increase, we have health and dental insurance increases of $980,995, or a 22% increase. This is based on our state health plan employer rates. The employer rates during the year effective January 1, because we were with the state health plan, they went from what we pay per month per employee, $521.96 to $647.86.
Is that not the largest by far increase we've seen in quite a while?
That is absolutely the largest.
What is going on there?
Well, from what I understand from the state treasurer, that they had to get the state health plan back on level, and so they went ahead and instead of charging this to the employees and increasing their fees, they put all of the increases on the employer. So all of their agencies that participate in the state health plan.
What did that do to the state budget, I wonder? Gotta be a huge number.
It had to have been a huge number, because for local governments who are part of the state plan, we had no idea we were going to get hit by that large increase.
Well, that explains yesterday in my TDA budget presentation from that group, the number looked out of kilter that they had for health care because they were adding an employee, but it went up way more than that one employee.
It did.
But the light bulb went off when I saw that 22%, because that's about what it went up more
Right.
than what I thought it should have went up.
So my payroll person was able to give me those rates, the dollar amounts for each month. And then also our dental, although we are self-insured with our dental, it did go up from $31.99 per month to $33.27 per month.
Well, that's about the rate you would expect it to be, but
Right.
it's nothing to work on the 22%. That's unheard of.
We were quite surprised. I thought it was a mistake when we received the notification. It was not.
But it's not a mistake.
It's not a mistake.
It is a mistake.
It is a mistake.
I'm gonna admit it.
Also, our liability and workers' comp insurance, we're increasing that by $103,000. We have we work with the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners with our liability and workers' comp insurance, and we have a premium that we pay each year, but we also have to pay for certain claims and a certain dollar amount, and our claims have increased over the past couple of years. We've unfortunately had some incidents that we're paying for, and so we are increasing, although because of our longevity with the association, we do have the premium amounts going down, but the claims, that doesn't eliminate the claims that we have to pay.
School resource office, does that include the salaries of the officers that assigned to the schools? Is that in this part of this budget, or that's in the sheriff's budget?
That is in the sheriff's budget, but we also have for other local government revenue, we get reimbursed from the school system. So whatever we pay out to our SROs, we are received back from the school system. So it's really an offset, but the revenues and expenditures are both included in here. But if we look at our local government retirement rate, there's an increase there. The rate is going from 12.04% to 13.1% for our law enforcement officers, and just for general local employees, the rate's increasing from 11.4% to 12.1%. For our gasoline line item, we're increasing that by $229,000. Travel and training requests have increased over what we budgeted last year, almost $200,000. With the release of COVID travel restrictions, more face-to-face opportunities, our departments are requesting more travel.
I know that number was cut in half last year. What was the original ask last year? What was the amount that was cut when it was cut in half?
We'll have to get that for you, but every department's travel request was cut in half, so we can get that.
But you don't know what that number was.
I do
just
not
want to
recall
compare
that
to this
number, but I believe it's probably back up to about where it is. So these
Okay.
are probably right around the original ask from last year.
Okay.
Can I ask you one question on the gas? What price did you use per gallon?
I believe we used $2.90 a gallon, because for next year, because of the way that we have our gas plan, we don't have to pay federal and state taxes on our gasoline. So we use $2.90.
Which amounts to about $3.45.
So it
With the taxes.
equates to $3.45,
Approximately.
and it's currently at
403.
$4.20.
So we may have to increase that.
So is that should you budget more in that line item?
Well, again,
Diesel is even more.
we could, I mean, the hope, I know you can't build a budget on hope,
Right.
but we look at it, and because gas prices fluctuate during the year, it could be higher in the fall and a lot lower in the spring. So we try to take a look at it, we try to keep our eye on gas prices, and you're right, it could be that by the time we get ready to present a recommended budget, that number is going to have to go up, based on what we're hearing.
All right, I want to ask you one more question, and I don't know if I should or not, but I'm going
Yeah,
to
go
ask it
ahead.
anyway. Has there ever been a request for SROs in the elementary schools? Has such a request ever been made, to your knowledge,
From the
Not-
school board.
from anybody? Because I've had some people, just in casual discussion, mention that to me, and I just wondered, had there ever been a request made to this board by anybody?
I'm not familiar with the request, but it could have been before me or to a previous board
Okay.
that it was mentioned.
It was suggested about 2 to 3 years ago from the school board that they were gonna make that request, but they did not make that request.
So is that something that maybe we mentioned, just get their thoughts on that at the May meeting? That's a lot of money if you do that.
Well, what they did, Wayne, if you recall, they decided not to go that route as a school board and go towards increasing security and doing other things instead of SROs,
Well,
but they can always ask that question.
My main reason for mentioning that is because there's a certain number of people that have concerns about safety in the schools, and they see safety
as a vehicle sitting out in front of the school and an SRO in the school. So if there's, like you said, an alternative way to ensure that safety, then we just need to educate the public on that.
Right.
Because most of them are not aware of that.
Right.
So maybe if we could get that on our agenda for the May meeting to try to push out that education to the general public.
Well, it's beginning to be a problem even in elementary schools. I read this kid came to school, was he a 6th grade student with a gun. And just lucky they say that some other kids saw it and reported it, and they quickly retrieved it. But it's best to be safe.
Yeah, I guess what I'd like to hear from them is how they are ensuring that safety at those elementary schools at that May 3rd meeting.
I'll share real quick. Scott reported that about 35% of ambulance fees are not collected between Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurance and self-pay.
35%.
The next item that's part of the $16 million increase that's included in the requested are new positions and reclassifications that are approximately $3,984,000. And this number includes, if there's a new position, if it includes the cost of uniforms for new positions or any kind of equipment that they have for new positions, that's also included in that number as well.
And is that breakdown on page?
That is going to be broken down on page 22.
Thank you.
You said it includes operation items. Would it include vehicle?
Yes. I believe the sheriff's office with new positions, they're also requesting vehicles, and we have that in that number. That would be included in the 3.9 million and not included in it wouldn't be included in the capital, the 9,784,000. That's included in this number that would go along with the new position.
Thank you.
And then the last item is the amount requested over what we budgeted last year, $7,939,000 for capital requests, and that is broken down for you and will be presented to you, but it's on page 15 through 20 of this book. So that is just a high level of where we are and the work that we have to do, but we wanted to have the department heads here so they could talk to you about what's included in their request, whether it's positions or capital, just so we're all aware of what we're working with, and if there are priorities that we need to talk about among the board, that will help us as we're working through the recommended budget.
One last question on this. Do you have year to year what the average revenue increase has been for the last 3, 4, 5 years? In other words, this year is 7.2 over last year, but last year was what percent over the previous year? Do you have that sort of information? I'm just looking for what the trends are.
We do have it for actual.
Yeah.
I mean, I can get that definitely for actual.
I'm just looking at the trend. Is it doing this, or is it level, or is it up and down, or?
We have been going up in our revenue just because, one, with our tax collections, our sales tax, we were very fortunate during COVID. We didn't see a decrease in our revenue collections so we're fortunate there. I can't say it's a huge increase every year, but it is an increase for us, and so we're very fortunate with our tax base and our sales tax that we have seen small increases each year.
Because a lot of this is recurring expense, and so if it recurs, then you want the revenue to recur.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we're fortunate to be able, as we've done increases, our increases have been able to be offset. Our expenditure increases have been able to be offset by our revenue
Yeah, I
increases.
think I'd be kind of remiss to assume that next year will be as good as this year as far as revenue increase, but I would hope that it would, you know, we would expect it to come up.
Right.
With what we're doing in economic development and
Right.
other things.
I think by the county establishing our in-house economic development and with the things that department is doing and moving forward with, we are really seeing some growth.
Okay, maybe you could provide that, so I just have it for information.
Sure,
It
sure.
would help us, I think, in some of the tough decisions that are
Right.
coming.
And again, as we talked about, with increases in operational items that are built into the budget, you know, there are sales tax, so we may have to go back and look at how we've calculated our sales tax, because we know the cost of items is also going to increase the sales tax. So we may have to look at that as our other costs have increased within the budget operational. So we may look at a different way of budgeting that for the current year as we move forward. Are there any other questions on this high level?
Mental health. I'm looking at 22 with $332,409. It's an increase, and you're projecting the 23, a slight drop in it. Where are these, this is just the county's part?
Right, well, what that includes our Trillium, what we pay to Trillium. It also includes the ABC bottle tax. So we put that as part of our mental health proceeds. Again, that bottle tax, we try to estimate, although we may project higher for collections this year, because that is an offset. The revenue comes in and we pay it out to support substance abuse functions, that whether it's paid to Trillium or for other agencies, we primarily support that with our ABC proceeds primarily go to Trillium also to support substance abuse programs. So again, part of that number, the reason you see that fluctuate is because that's an estimate on the bottle tax collections that's included in that number as well.
Outside of ABC funds, what other monies from the county go into
We have
that line item, mental health?
We have in the past, we have the Hope Initiative that we put in there, that we paid out. We have
Basically the 120,000.
Well, it's the 120,000 that we pay to Trillium, the ABC, and then I believe it's one more. That's primarily it. We have one of our local human services that we paid out, one of our outside agencies that falls into that category as well, and that is, it's the Christian Fellowship that comes out of that mental health fund.
It's an area that's neglected, mental health. And it's not on the county's blame for that, but the whole country. And that's why a lot of these other problems we have stems from mental health, from people with mental problems, and they're not being addressed. I saw in the paper with this lady standing out in the middle of the lane and was hit by a truck. The mirror on the truck hit her. I almost hit that same lady one night. She gets out there and stands. She needs help, and she's not getting it. And I inquired about it, and law enforcement people tell you, and I don't need to be taking up a whole lot of time here, but law enforcement people tell you it's got to be a relative or something that commit them. Police can't do it. And so a lot of people go and neglect it. It's something that needs to be addressed, and I'm sure it's going to require more funding in order to get it done, but the state's not paying much attention to it. Well, some, but not enough to kind of put a dent in the problem of mental health. And so it's one that needs brought to the attention of those in authority.
Thank you, Commissioner Belfield. Does anybody else have any questions about the information Donna just reviewed with us?
Yeah, I know. This $5.893 million increase you're projecting, is that included in this 16.6% increase? My big question is the $1 million that's coming from lottery funds, it's already designated to Rocky Mount High School. Is that a wash, or is that
So
not
it's,
included, or what?
I looked at this separately. So the 5.8 million, if you just look at revenue in total over just comparing revenue to revenue. So not netting out where we are, but just looking at what we looked at from revenue estimates moving forward to 2023 to what we budgeted in 2022. It's an increase from last year, just the revenue. So that is built into that number. The 16 million is an increase in from what we recommended and approved in 2022 to what's being requested in 2023 for expenditures.
Which doesn't include the salary study,
That is correct.
which could be significant. I
It could
expect
be.
it will be.
It could be.
Only other thing I'd say, Donna, you made a comment about potentially looking at sales tax projections and revenue. I think we all know, and we've seen here in the last couple of weeks, the model that we're currently in is not sustainable over the long haul. We had a 0.25% interest increase last week, and that 0.25% on the federal level increased the home mortgage for a 30-year loan almost 2%. That one item. And we're projected to get 5 more this year from the Fed. So I'd be cautious in making much adjustments because where we're at today is not where we're going to be this time next year.
You're absolutely right.
I know how home building works. When that interest rate goes up one more time, it's just going, it ain't going to stop, but it's going to slow way, way down.
It's already done.
Yeah, well, it went from 3% up to your 30-year mortgage now is a tad bit over 5%, over a 0.25% jump in the Fed rate. So I'd be just default.
Thank you. Well, if there's no other discussion, I'd like us to move forward with the next item on the agenda. And I'll direct you to actually page 1. We're going to move backwards a little bit. Apologize for that. The next item is on our credit rating, a credit rating overview and debt capacity analysis. And Donna, would you like to introduce Mr. Cole?
Sure. We have Ted Cole, he's Senior Vice President with Davenport and Company, Public Finance. And hopefully you're familiar with him. He's part of he is our financial advisor for the county, and we appreciate everything Ted does with us. He works with us on when we do our financing and working through that whole process. And what he has for you today for discussion is a credit rating overview, the general fund, financial history, fund balance trends, our existing tax-supported debt profile, and our debt capacity analysis. And so with that, Ted, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Well, good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. As Donna said, our discussions typically revolve around capital planning, debt financing. So obviously you all just had a good briefing on mostly your operating budget, and there's not a lot in here that's going to address the operating side of your budget. There are elements of it that come into play, but most of our discussion will be about debt, fund balance, and capital planning, and we're going to sort of discuss at a pretty high level. So everybody has a hard copy. There are page numbers in the lower right corner, and I think the setup of the agenda is nice because I think hopefully some of the key takeaways from this discussion will be helpful to you as you hear, I think after lunch, more about capital needs and capital requests. So it'll sort of help frame that discussion. There are a number of things in the appendix of this book, if you look at page 2, the table of contents, that I'm not going to go through, but if we need to reference anything in the appendix, we can. It's got the detail of all of your existing debt, everything that's in place today in terms of debt. It's got the details of our debt capacity scenarios, which is what I'm going to wrap up on. The most recent rating reports from the rating agencies, and a copy of your current financial policy. So those are all in the back. I'm going to go through this front section in front of tab A. Page 3 basically covers what Donna just laid out for you, sort of what we're going to talk about. Your bond ratings, some peer comparisons, fund balance, and then we really focus much of the discussion on debt. So with that, and please stop me as we go if you have any questions at all. Happy to sort of address those as we go. So if you go to page 5, this kind of lays out for you all where the county is currently rated from the rating agencies, and you've had bond ratings for a number of years. You primarily access capital two ways. You either go to a bank, and we've done that a number of times, most recently for the school and the detention center, but from time to time, particularly for larger loans or loans that have a longer payback, we go to the bond market, and when you go to the bond market, you need a bond rating. So we talk a lot about the rating agencies, and you can see in the bottom left chart, there are 3 national rating agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch. You all, like many local governments, have ratings from Moody's and Standard & Poor's. Those are the 2 most commonly used. Fitch is in play from time to time. We just haven't, frankly, had a need to go to Fitch at this point. I think we're well served by Moody's and S&P, and it just creates some additional cost and annual due diligence to bring on the third. And you can see within the ratings, and I know some of you have seen this, maybe all of you have seen this, but just a refresher, AAA is the highest rating any local government or state government for that matter can achieve. So if you're not AAA, you're below that, you're in what we call the AA category, and you can see within AA, within any of these rating agencies, there's 3 levels, kind of call it high, middle, and low AA. And for y'all, with Moody's, you're in the middle of the AA category. You're a AA2. So the next rating that you could achieve upward is AA1, downward is AA3, but you're in the AA category. And from Standard & Poor's, you're in AA minus, so you're at the lower end of their AA category. And we've had some discussions with staff about, particularly with Standard & Poor's, maybe at some point reaching out to them and having a conversation about the possibility to improve that rating. You can see Moody's and S&P are a little bit different. So we think there is an opportunity in the near term, potentially with Standard & Poor's. And then over the long term, certainly believe there's an opportunity for the county as things continue to evolve, if things continue to evolve positively, that you can improve your overall rating. You have been at these current bond ratings since 2010, so 12 or so years you've been at these current ratings. The right-hand side is we'll sort of introduce some peer comparisons. We subscribe to a database that Moody's maintains, so we look at counties, particularly counties nationally. The rating category above you, AA1, there's 123 of those currently rated AA1 by Moody's. Within your category, AA2, there's 223, one of which is Nash County. In the rating category below you, 159. And then within North Carolina, you can see there are 9 counties at AA1, that's one notch above you. There are 18 counties that are at AA2, the same rating as you all are, and then 10 that are AA3. So this kind of will give you a sense. On a few slides, we're going to look at Nash County compared to those national counties and the North Carolina counties, so you can start to get a little bit of perspective on some fund balance ratios and some debt ratios. Okay? Any questions on the ratings?
So after these 37 counties, all the other 100 counties are rated lower?
You've got 9 or 10 that are rated AAA. So that's another 10 that's accounted for. And then you've got many counties that just don't have a rating, have never needed to have one. So I think, don't hold me to it, about half the counties in the state have ratings, give or take. The other half don't issue debt enough, or they just haven't had a need to do it. Certainly not that they're not credit worthy.
Do you know how many national counties it is?
Nationally?
Yes, sir.
I don't know. I
Okay.
should know, but I don't know, and
Okay.
I will try to follow up on that.
Just wondering what the 223 meant.
Yeah, that's a good question. That would be helpful perspective. So I'll see if I can't get that before I leave. Okay, so page 6 just gives you a high-level overview of the last report that Moody's published, which was last summer. So you weren't in the bond market last summer, but they publish, Moody's does, they try to publish every year on counties that they rate. The full report's in the appendix. It's about 4 pages long, but this is kind of the key takeaway, particularly on the right-hand side. You can read it. Quality credit position, AA2 is what they call the median rating for all U.S. counties. So what that means is all the U.S. counties that are rated, half of them are lower than AA2 and half are higher than AA2. So your rating is the median rating nationally. They talk about finances, very healthy, favorable to your rating category or your rating level. Debt and pensions was generally low, and that's a strength for you all relative to where you're rated. Your economy and tax base is healthy, but slightly weaker for your current rating, right? And you're going to understand here in a moment kind of what goes into the rating. Generally, with Moody's, there's 4 areas. There's economy, finances, management, and debt. And in North Carolina, we get very good scores for management because it's a good state from a rating agency perspective, good local government structure. Okay? And then you can see at the very bottom, this is a little bit dated, but it's still probably true, the sorts of things that they believe could move the rating higher or lower. So an improvement in fund balance, a significant improvement in your tax base would be positives, decline in financial condition, deterioration of the tax base, increased unemployment or weaker wealth levels. And as you think about this, you'll see it in a moment. Some of these things the rating agencies look at, you all as a board have control over, meeting to meeting or budget to budget. Other things you don't have direct control over, like the tax base. You can certainly try to guide things to where people want to come here and invest, and property values are increasing and jobs are being created, but it's not the kind of thing you can manage budget to budget. So there are things that they look at that are longer term initiatives for y'all, and there are things that they look at that maybe you have a little more control over in the short term. Okay? And that's a good segue to page 7. The left-hand side will give you a high-level overview of how Moody's rates local governments. And so we talk a lot about the rating agencies. I think generally it's a good proxy for how a bank credit officer will look at the county as well. They may not publish their credit methodology at a bank, and every bank might do things a little differently, but it's a pretty good proxy for how they would do it. So for Moody's, on that bottom left chart, you'll see economy and tax base is worth 30% of the rating. So what are they looking at? They're looking at your total tax base in dollars. They're looking at your tax base on a per capita basis, which is just math. And they're looking at median family income. So there's 3 specific inputs that go into their economy score. And then they go through finances. They're basically looking at where's your fund balance today and what has the trend been over the last 5 years. There's very specific data they put in there. So they're looking at audits, they're looking at budgets, things like that. Management, you get good scores for being a North Carolina county, but they're also looking at your policies, your procedures, how you're performing relative to your budget, things like that. And then finally, they look at debt and pension. So sort of looking at fixed cost obligations between debt and pension. So that kind of comprises the makeup of their analysis, and it's very data-driven. You're going to see a scorecard here in a moment. They put in all of this data, and out of that comes a score and a rating, and that's the quantitative part of it. And then they have the ability, as shown on the right-hand side of this page 7, to make adjustments to the score based on qualitative or more subjective type factors that are hard to find in the numbers or don't show up in the numbers. So they might look at your economy and your tax base and say, you know what, they're part of a very broad and diverse tax base, and that's a positive. They might look at things and say, you know, they've got very high concentration in their tax base with a couple of large taxpayers or large employers. That's a vulnerability. So it's data-driven first, but then they have the ability to make adjustments as they need to capture significant things that the numbers don't necessarily show you. So the detail of their scorecard is on page 8. Across the left-hand margin, 1 through 20, give or take, are all the inputs that we just talked about, right? So they go through and they put inputs in this model for Nash County. And generally speaking, you'd like as many of those green boxes as far to the left as you can, right? More to the left means it's a stronger score. You go all the way over and you see columns N, O, P, and Q. Basically, that's where they put the input for your data under column N. Each input has a weight, a score, and a weighted score, and they roll up to the bottom right corner. And based on your FY21 audit, the most recently closed fiscal year, they have you at a 2.02, which in their scale is a AA2 rating. So the scorecard that you all have with Moody's pencils out to exactly where the rating is, AA2. So we feel like you know, it's on point, it's on target with their methodology. They're accurate in their scoring level, but this gives you an idea of how they go about it. And again, there's things in here that have pretty significant bearing on the rating that are really hard to deal with in the near term, right? Again, I go back to tax base, wealth levels, things like that. It's just, those are things that really evolve over time. So I think the important takeaway is, as it relates to the rating agencies, you know, try to control those things that you have control over and manage them as best you can, budget to budget. And you've done that, and you're going to see a little bit of that as we go through this next few slides. Page 9, this is the last S&P report. They do not publish every year, so it's a little bit dated. They do review you every year, so they're going to look at audits, they're going to look at budgets, but it's not going to be a report that they publish every year. So it's a bit dated in that regard. But when you go to page 10, you'll see their methodology on the left. I'm not going to go through it at the same level, but where Moody's had 4 different areas of focus, S&P has 7, but they get to about the same place. Economy is worth 30% of the rating. Management is about 20%. Fund balance and financial matters is about 30%. So a lot of times when we talk about credit ratings and bond ratings, we think about debt. Debt must be the key driver of how we're rated, and it's certainly important, but it's 10, 15%, give or take. It's not necessarily a key driver. They're trying to look at a lot of different areas, and so you can have strengths in some areas and weaknesses in others that will offset each other. So you can have 2 different counties that have the same bond rating, but they got there through different ways. You know, some might be really strong on economy and weak in other places, and others might have a weaker economy, but they're very strong on debt and fund balance, as an example. Yes, sir.
Could you define what the word management means? Are they looking at the personnel we have? Or are they looking at the way we overall manage our finances?
The way, so the finances show up by the results, right? Where's your fund balance? Where is your trend on fund balance? Are you running a budget? Are you running a surplus on your budget or a deficit? Management comes in, one, by virtue of, the North Carolina form of government is a starting point, which is good, but then they're looking at policies, procedures. Is there good information flow between staff and elected officials? Are elected officials informed and able to make decisions based on good information, timely reporting, capital planning? Ideally, you could get into a place where you start talking about multi-year budgeting. It's those sorts of things where they, I mentioned policies, those sorts of things that kind of get rolled up in the the management, not necessarily the credentials of any one person or the tenure. It's more about the things that are hopefully institutionalized, right? The processes and the procedures that transcend any manager or board member. Okay? On the right-hand side, what you'll see is based on they have a simpler scorecard at S&P, but we see you penciling out closer to a AA rating than the AA minus. So that is the reason we mentioned there may be a near-term opportunity with S&P to improve that rating. All things being equal, you'd rather have a higher rating than a low rating. Does going from AA minus to AA, is it a game changer in your ability to borrow money or the interest rates? It's not, it's not going to change things in a real meaningful way, but you'd rather be higher than lower, and it's a progression because as you get into the higher AA and even into the AAA, anything you need to fund with debt is going to be a little bit less expensive than it otherwise would be, and I think that means you've got greater options and flexibility. So I think that's something, maybe with the close of fiscal year 22 as an example, that might be a good time when we have one more audit to engage them in a conversation, for example. Okay? So that's ratings, rating agencies. And again, I think it's important because one, you've already established your rating, and so it needs to be maintained as long as those bonds are outstanding. And two, it does have an impact on your ability to borrow efficiently. So page 12, this is general fund financial trends over a 6-year window. This ties right back to audits, fiscal year 16 through 21. This kind of just helps get things oriented, right? So the top 10 lines are revenues as presented by major category or major department. So you can see on line 10, total general fund revenues evolving over this period of time from about 90 to 97 million. And in fiscal 21 in particular, those first two line items were significantly up. Your ad valorem taxes and your other taxes and licenses, which I suspect is where we're also capturing sales tax in there, I would think. So revenues were up fairly significantly in 21. The middle of the page down through line 24 are the expenditures by major category or department within the general fund. So you can see total expenditures year by year on line 24, okay? And those have been, in the last couple of years, more flat. So you sort of held the line, if you will, on expenditures. Revenues have been growing. And so what we see on line 26 is just simple math, revenues over or under expenditures. And in every year, right, on line 26, you're positive. So operationally, you are structurally balanced, you're running a surplus operationally. And particularly in fiscal year 21, it was a pretty significant surplus, almost $5.5 million, okay? And I think that's simply, revenues were up and expenditures were flat. So line 26 is important because what that demonstrates is you're structurally balanced, current year revenues are covering current year expenses and then some. The bottom third of this page is where you have other sources and uses, transfers going in and out, and particularly line 30, transfers out. You can see those are some fairly significant dollars. And over the last 3 years, the primary sorts of things where those transfers out have gone would be like your high-speed internet initiative, jail, detention center, cash that you're contributing to those projects, health department, ag center, some schools, things like that I would call sort of pay-as-you-go capital that you all have chosen to fund through non-debt, right? Not debt. Now, we know we've issued some debt, but you've also put cash in. So when you go down and you say, okay, operationally, we're running a surplus every year on line 26, but then we're doing a number of transfers and we're spending some money on capital projects. So what you'll see on line 37, you're not necessarily adding to fund balance every single year. Now, you did in 21. You added almost 4.5, almost 4.6 million to fund balance. But the prior year, you pulled fund balance down a little bit. Not a problem, because you had over $3 million of capital that you spent money on, right? So operationally, you added to fund balance, but then you used some fund balance for capital, and that was a cognizant sort of decision that you all made. No negatives. For the rating agencies, they like to see that you're adding to fund balance. They like to see that your fund balance level is keeping up with the growth in your budget. But if you're spending fund balance, doing so on capital one-time things is absolutely preferred over supplementing your operating budget. So at the very bottom, you can track total fund balance in the general fund over this period of time, gone from about 40 to about 46, almost 47 million. That's total fund balance, okay? So we go to page 13, excuse me, and we're sort of going to drill down a little bit on fund balance. And that table on the left, what you're going to see on lines 5 through 12 is all the different categories of fund balance, right? So accounting principles, accounting requirements say that, you've got, in fiscal year 21, you had $46.8 million of fund balance, but there's different categories that they have to go into and be booked in your audit. We do have a little typo, I apologize, under fiscal year 20, line 12, it says 45.2 million, that should be 42.2. Apologize for that. So when you look at fiscal 20 to fiscal 21, on total fund balance, line 12, it's basically going from 42 million to 46. You just might want to make a note of that. Your policy for fund balance is in the bottom left corner, and what it looks at is really it's talking about that unassigned component of your fund balance, which is line 11. That's the pot of money of your fund balance that you all have the most control over, the least amount of outside restrictions. These other categories of fund balance, whether it's assigned, committed, restricted, there are outside or internally placed restrictions on those monies. So when we talk about your fund balance policy and the monies that you have the most discretion over, we're generally talking about that unassigned component on line 11, and we know that that has been coming down over the last 3 or 4 years, right? If you look at line 11 in that upper left chart, you'll look, it was at a high point of about 30 million, stepped down, and we finished in 21 at about 24 million. So that trend has been down, and I think largely attributed to you've been making some investments in capital, which is completely, fine. It's a permitted use of that in your policy, and you can still demonstrate that you're maintaining compliance with your policy, that unassigned fund balance, if you look at that upper right graph, the dark green bar is your unassigned fund balance as a percent of your expenditures in any given year. So it kind of hit the high point in 2017, right? That's when that pot of money was about 30 million. It's been declining primarily because you've been spending some reserves on capital. You've had a little bit of budget growth, so that's sort of the budget's growing, but the fund balance isn't growing at a commensurate base or level. So the decline is there, but you're still comfortably above your 15% policy. So you're in compliance, and that would be a discussion with the rating agencies about spending of those reserves. At what point do you decide that you don't want that fund balance to go any lower? There's been some discussion we've had with staff about maybe taking some time to revisit some of your financial policies, and there may be an opportunity to just reassess that fund balance policy, not to say that you want to change necessarily the 15% minimum. Maybe it's a twofold policy where you say maybe you'd like to establish a higher level of a target. Not an absolute requirement, I just think something to talk about and think about, and maybe that's relevant to do as your budget is evolving. There may be a way to bolster that fund balance policy a little bit if you decide that that's something you want to do and that you're comfortable doing, that you're going to be able to, manage your budget and do that, right? So if you commit in any way, whether it's a target or an absolute minimum that's higher than the 15%, we would just want to make sure that there's a high level of comfort that you can continue to operate and demonstrate compliance, and that you're going to be able to do the things you need to do if you change that policy.
About 5 years ago, the board began to hear quite frequently about our unassigned fund balance in a negative way, particularly from school boards and some general public. And I think we made a concentrated decision to maybe work towards not letting that continue to grow and maybe spend it down a little bit, whether it's the right decision or not a right decision. But we did it, as you said, by more often using unassigned fund balance for capital rather than that, to try to, and I think you'll remember this, Commissioner Outlaw, to try to cut down on the relic about the fund balance.
I understand.
Was that a correct way to go about it, or do you have an opinion on that? I'd like to hear it if you could, and I'm very interested in looking at our fund balance our fund balance policy, and possibly move that up from where it's at with a board in place that works together well and understands that fund balance is important. I think it's a time to certainly look at that, so I'm glad to hear you say that. But back to the original question, is that a prudent way to go about it, what we did? And seeing it on a chart like this tells me we may need to level that out some.
I think it was, I don't think there are any flaws in what you all did. And there are a number of places that sort of approach it in the same way. Look, at some point, how much money do we really need in that unassigned fund balance? We know that unassigned fund balance, when we look at this, it's a snapshot at June 30 of every given year, right? It's a moment in time. And through the year, your fund balance is going to ebb and flow, right? You have some months where you're bringing in more money than you're spending, and other months where you're spending more than you're bringing in. So we need to make sure, first and foremost, you've got enough in there to cash flow through the ebbs and flows of your budget. And you're going to see here in a moment, you compare very well where that fund balance is. So you have spent some, and as a percent of your budget, it has come down, but even so, you're still compare well at the rating level you have. The way Moody's, just use them as an example, the way you get dinged a little bit on that is not so much where the value of the fund balance is today, but the 5-year trend, right? So, but remember, there's no one input in that scorecard that's going to drive the whole thing. So you might lose a little bit on the 5-year trend because you've been spending it down, but you're taking care of important projects, right? And that gets to investing in the community and some other things, that growing the economy and making this a place where people want to come and invest. So it's a trade-off. So I would say the way you've gone about it, which has been very deliberate, I can't swear we've made this presentation every year, but most years, and I know you get briefings from your staff on fund balance on a regular basis, so you're making well-informed decisions. So I think it stands as a good approach that you've done, and you have not compromised your policy. And you'll see on the next page, even though it has come down a bit, you still compare very well to similarly rated communities.
But if you look at that trend, that line, look at it like that, it can't be any straighter. I mean, to look at it from a profile standpoint, it needs to change a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I mean, again, in a perfect world, and not that everything you need to do needs to line up with what the rating agencies see, is that you would be growing all of these fund balances, however you slice and dice it, you'd be growing those at a commensurate level to how your budget is growing. But, that's just not how you necessarily can manage a county year to year, and that this will ebb and flow. But I think you've got the proper guardrails here, that it's not going to get out of line and become a real weakness. And if you're able to get to a place where you say, look, maybe we maintain, hypothetically, we maintain the 15% minimum, but we're going to strive for something in the 20 or 25, just throwing that out as an example. That will strengthen the policy, but it gives you a little bit of latitude to manage that within that range, the minimum of 15 and whatever that target might be if you get to that place.
Isn't the more you use that fund balance, doesn't it affect your rating?
It could. It could become if you continue that downward trend, and it could become one of those factors that becomes negative enough where they say, look, now we're getting to a place where you're no longer managing that fund balance at a level we believe you should. So it could impact your rating. I don't believe you're there, but over time, if it were to continue or accelerate, it could be an issue.
I know we're not there now, but I've seen it affect bond rating.
It absolutely has, and when you go back and read some of those reports, they'll note, here's something that could lead to a downgrade. It would be, fund balance is one of those.
If you get a downgrade, then the interest on money you borrow is going to increase.
That's exactly right. That's the correlation, right? So it's not that you won't have access to borrow money, just that it's going to be more expensive.
It's just going to pay more.
That's right. In our market, municipal market, we really want to stay in that AA category, right? Remember, AAA is the top, and then you got that AA, and then you got the single A. You really want to stay in that AA because we see a significant increase in the borrowing rates when you get into that single A. That's just what the market dictates, that is kind of a bright line that they look at when you go from AA down to single A. It's a fairly significant increase in your borrowing rate. That could be considered material to your affordability of borrowing.
What can we do to get a AAA rating? You get in that category.
Sure.
I know it's
so
very few make it, but
very few make it, and you're 2 notches away from that. Let's just use Moody's for the time being. You would first need to go to AA1, and then you go to AA2. And if you think back to sort of what are all the inputs of the ratings, just you could say and just be very disciplined for a number of years. We're going to grow fund balance every year, and we're gonna maximize that 30% of the rating, right? And we're gonna limit how much debt we do, which is gonna maximize that part of the rating. We're gonna beef up all our policies, our procedures, our reporting, and so you've now got about 70% of the rating. You've controlled it as best you can, right, as a board. The last 30% is the toughest, which is growing your tax base significantly and growing wealth levels. And so that's not to say you can't get there, but those are likely to be the things that are, one, the hardest to change or improve, and I think would take the most time. And they're kind of what really sets apart that AA2, AA1 from that high AAA is particularly wealth, income, and tax base. And that just takes time.
Well, it's just hard, as we see, to move this thing anyway.
It is. It's been 12 years.
It's been 12 years. It's just hard to move it.
Right. Now, you could also say, look, we've kept up with a ever-increasing bar, right? I mean, being a AA2 today, I mean, it's a higher bar, and everybody generally, many places have been evolving higher in all of these credit factors. So you've been keeping pace, and then some, but it is tough. And the last couple, I think, are the toughest because you're getting into, within North Carolina counties, there's 8 or 9 AAAs, and you think about who they are. They've got extremely large tax bases. You're talking about Wake, you're talking about Mecklenburg, you're talking about Buncombe, Guilford, New Hanover, very large tax bases, and wealth levels that are above the state average.
Where's Dare at? There too?
Dare's, they're going to Maybe in here. They're not AAA that I'm aware of.
Same as we are? I'm surprised at that.
They're the
AA2. Yeah.
A little surprised at that with the tax base and little expenditures they got.
Yeah, and I think you get places like that. They've got a very high tax base, I imagine, but they probably are challenged with wealth levels because many of the people that own properties there report wealth in other places, their primary home. And so you have a large service economy there that tends to pull some of those wealth levels down. That'd be an off-the-cuff, I guess, observation.
Well, I noticed, well, I haven't seen it in the past couple of years, but those smaller counties up in the mountains had pretty good ratings within small population, you know, and their budgets are not that challenging either.
Yeah, you know, they maybe can provide the services they provide a little more efficiently because of the smaller geographic footprint. You know, it's all sorts of things. It's really, you know, you've got an interstate running through your county. There's things that naturally happen that wouldn't otherwise. Maybe you're not responsible, every county's not responsible for water and sewer, but ample capacity of water and sewer to help facilitate growth. You know, it's just so many different things that can make one place a higher rating than the other when on paper they look very different. They're either smaller or they're much larger or they're more rural than urban, what have you. And they try with their methodology to bridge that gap.
Ted, I think we all know that Nash County, Rocky Mount has lost a lot of headquarters over the last 10, 15 years. Been Hardee's, major banks, et cetera, and the list goes on. But you're saying when those officers and those stockholders relocate to another area because we lost headquarters, that affects this bond rating, which is the first time I've understood it.
Yeah,
to
I
take
think
place.
that has to have an impact at some level on potentially property values. I don't know if there's a max exodus, but you know, I would think median family income and things like that would be impacted, and that's a big one for Moody's. Is, you know, are you at or below or above the state and national level for median family income? So those higher paying jobs can be an issue. Hopefully on the economic development front, you know, one of the goals is not only to create jobs, but create higher paying jobs and, you know, move the needle higher on take-home pay or salaries, whatever the benchmark is. And, you know, Moody's looks at census data, and so it gets updated periodically. S&P does a little bit different. They try to account for there are different places in the country that are more cost effective to live in than others, and so they try to account that maybe wealth levels are less in the southeast or in this state or that state, but it's also a lower cost of living. So they don't do it exactly the same, but they try to get to a place where that is a meaningful input. I know you're looking at the clock. Are we okay on?
Are you all ready for a break?
How much he's like been finished?
Oh, he's not gonna be finished for a while. He's gonna take you to lunch.
Oh, okay.
I don't know that I can take you all the way to lunch, but I can go for another little bit, and maybe we're at a stopping point before we go into debt.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and take a 15-minute break.
Okay.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and get back started and ask Ted to continue on.
All right, great. And I'll just, I do want to cover one thing for you on page 14. And if you're looking at this as the last piece on fund balance, I would suggest we look at just the right-hand side of page 14. This is that unassigned fund balance, right? So that pot of money where you all as a board have the most control. And remember, for fiscal year 21, that was, I'm going to round up slightly, that was $24 million, okay? And we know that has come down a little bit, right? So when you look at that upper right chart, Nash County is in gold, and that gold takes you, the key, or the scale is hard to see, but that takes you to that $24 million mark. The light green bars are the national counties. It's the median, so it's the midpoint of each group. So you can see the AA1s nationally, the light green, are higher than the AA2, which is higher than the AA3, right? So nationally, and within North Carolina, the dark green bars, you can see the AA1s, the median is about $60 million. You see that top dark green bar goes out to $60 million. That's the median. But within that group, and there were 9 or 10 of them, you have that blue line. Somebody was as low as about 24 million, and somebody was as high as 123 million. So that blue line gives you the min and the max within that peer group. And remember, we're talking about some very large counties, right? You're talking about Mecklenburg probably is the 123 million. So on a dollar basis, your gold bar lines up pretty well to the AA2 median. And you are also pretty much even, give or take, with the low end of the AA1s, the low end of that blue line. But that's dollars. I think a more relevant comparison is the chart directly below it, where we convert it to a % of your budget. So it's trying to take into account that you have some very large and some very small places with budgets that are different sizes. So this is a % of your budget. And remember, in fiscal year 21, your unassigned fund balance was about 24.5, call it 25% of your budget. And that's what the gold bar is showing you. And then you can see the national counties in the light green, the North Carolina counties in the dark green, with the blue line representing the min and the max. So I think what I said earlier is, yes, even though that unassigned fund balance has been coming down a little bit, and it isn't necessarily maintaining at the same pace as your budget growth, you're not an outlier on the negative side. You're right on top of the medians, and there are people that have similar or even higher ratings than you that have lower levels of reserve. So I think the question earlier is, have we done something wrong or should we have done something different? I don't think so, because you've been spending it on one-time capital, which is important. You've made that decision knowingly, and even though you've had that trend over the last few years, you still line up well, and it's all things being equal, it's a little bit weaker than you would have been had you not spent that money, but you've made a decision, I think rightfully so, that those are important projects and you want to fund them, and by doing what you did, you issued less debt to do the same projects. So I wanted to close the loop on the fund balance discussion, that you're still in very good shape on a comparison basis. All right, so the rest of this book, and we're in the home stretch here, is about debt. Yeah.
My question is, even though we're at the AA2 rating, what is the value of necessarily trying to get to the AAA rating?
Next level or two?
Or the AA1
Right.
rating, other than less borrowing interest rates on money?
Right.
Or does that bring in more business prospect by the rating? What would be the value of us trying to get that versus saying, okay, we're going to critique and stay at this level?
Yeah, I think the most practical or measurable benefit of going higher in your bond rating is lower borrowing costs, as you said. There is a correlation there. Beyond that, I mean, it's do business or prospects look at bond ratings and say, that's a very well-managed county, a place where we might want to consider locating? Hard to know. I mean, it is hard to know whether they're, where other benefits manifest themselves by getting to that higher level of rating. I guess certainly there's this sort of the pride factor. But as we discussed, just accumulating reserves for the sake of accumulating reserves and making yourselves look better for the rating agencies is not necessarily the right strategy, as you said. I mean, there's a point at which, you know, you don't need to keep growing that unassigned fund balance. You can make a case that, look, we're at an adequate level of reserves. We believe we're cash flowing. You know, we've got enough money where we can deal with an emergency situation. We've got enough money where we can exercise action to take advantage of a situation, matching money, or you buy a piece of property, you've got the cash to do that. And there's a point at which, you know, enough's enough, and maybe if you hold your reserves at a certain level, maybe that doesn't help you get to that next level of rating, but in the grand scheme of things, it's a more cost-effective way to run the county. So there's only a couple of ways, I guess, that I know of that we could quantify the benefit of that higher rating, and that is in the borrowing cost. But there may be other less quantifiable benefits from outsiders looking in, but it's, you know, it's hard to say that in and of itself is a reason to pursue it. Okay?
A great answer.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I went back after you said that, and probably, I don't know, 300 or 400 meetings with industries looking to come here. Maybe 3 times they have made mention of that in the presentation. It's not often brought up.
That's right. And even at AA2, you're in pretty good company. I mean, it's a very high rating. So, I mean, we talk about improving the rating, and you know, there is certainly a school of thought that says there's a point at which what we need to do to get there, particularly the things you can control, right? Because you can't really manage the tax base in real time. So you try to compensate with those other things that you can control. And there's a point at which you say, you know, I think there's the cost benefit just doesn't add up.
Well, we'd have to make some drastic changes to be able to increase that rating. And the net gain would be very hard to justify.
Yeah. I think you're doing just fine with the way you're managing. I do think there's an opportunity over time as the county grows and diversifies, assuming that it continues to do that. I do think there's an opportunity to improve the rating, but I don't think necessarily it's something that you need to set your sights on as a near-term goal. I do think S&P's a little different because I think they might have you underrated right now. Be nice to get that one up.
Right.
But beyond that, I think it's likely to occur naturally if you continue to do what y'all are doing. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about debt. I'll pick up on page 16. This is your existing tax-supported debt profile. So if you have any debt outstanding related to water, sewer, district-type utility debt, this is not included. On the left-hand side of the page, you can see graphically by fiscal year, every bar is a year, starting with the year we're in, fiscal year 22, principal and interest. You'll see that it's going to step up in fiscal 23, which is the budget you're working on. That's because we're going to fully absorb the new debt service for the school and detention center that we issued last year. So 2023 will be the high level of debt service, and then it starts to step down again, kind of gradual decline. Out several years, you get some big step downs. In terms of the numbers in the bottom left, there's $68.5 million of debt outstanding. About 6 of it was voted GO bonds. I think that was primarily for a community college project years ago, but that debt is still outstanding. And the rest, the 62 million or so, are what we call COPs or LOBs or installments. They're loans that are secured by whatever the project was that you built or funded. So pretty typical debt structure. Just call it 68 million of debt outstanding. On the right-hand side, you can see by fiscal year, your principal payments, your interest, your total payments, all of your debt is fixed rate. The payments are only going to change if you change them, refund them, or pay them off early. So we know that total payment column to the penny. You'll see that under the principal column, you're retiring $5+ million a year. So, you know, you're retiring a significant amount of that 68 million each year, 5 to 6 million, which gets to that far right column, which is one of the debt ratios we look at. It's called a 10-year payout. What that's measuring in percentage is how much of that 68 million of principal will be paid back in the next 10 years. So it's a forward look. We're not assuming any new debt right now, just what you have. And what it's saying is 10 years from now, 76, 77% of that debt will have been paid back. Higher is better. It means you're amortizing debt quickly. You're not backloading it. And you can see that on page 17. We graph it a little bit differently on the left. The green bars are your payout ratio. So it's about 76%, and it's getting higher. No problem. As we talked about earlier with policies, you do have debt policies. We're going to talk about them. This might be another policy to consider. It would be a policy that would establish a minimum payout ratio. So it would say, as we issue new debt, if we decide to do that for whatever the purpose may be, we want to be able to demonstrate when we bring that on that our payout ratio won't fall below X. That's a possibility. I would suggest we only do that or discuss it once we have a sense of what your CIP looks like, right? Because I think we want to understand, and maybe that's the next topic after lunch, is updating capital project requests, what's on the list, what's on the long-term list, so that we understand if we do start thinking about revisiting some of the debt policies, we have the benefit of doing that with an understanding of what department heads will be asking you all to consider going forward. On the comparison basis, up in the upper right, you're in gold. You want your bar further to the right, and this one higher is better. And you can see you compare very well. You are right on par with the AA North Carolina counties, and you can see there are counties out there that have an even lower payout ratio by those blue lines. So you're in good shape, and you can see for S&P in the very bottom right corner, if you can demonstrate for them that you're at 65% or better, you get a little bit of added credit in your debt score, which you are. All right, page 18, debt to assessed value. So in this case, we're measuring the debt outstanding, which is 68 million. That's the principal, as a percent of your tax base, which is a little over 8 billion. And when we do that math in the upper left, the green bar, you're at 0.86%. So the debt outstanding as a percent of your tax base is 0.86% and declining because you're paying back debt every year. We've also assumed that your tax base will grow by about 1.5% per year, just, you know, to acknowledge growth, maybe more, maybe less. Your policy says, the red line, we don't want to go above 2%. You're well below it, so you're in compliance with your policy. Lower is better. And you have room within this policy to take on additional debt. Not unlimited, but you could take on more debt and still show compliance with your policy. That doesn't mean you should, and it doesn't mean it's affordable, but there is the capacity, if you needed to do additional debt for capital and continue to show compliance with your policy. On the comparison in the upper right, you'll see your bar in gold. Lower is better here. You want your bar further to the left. I'll come back to the national light green bars. Those look a little out of whack. I'll explain that. The dark green bars are North Carolina counties, and you can see you're right on the median for AA2 and AA1, and you'll see that there are places that have debt to assessed value pushing 2%. Okay? So you compare very well to your North Carolina peers. For Moody's, you're in what they consider their strong category. The national bars look a little odd, the light green, because when you get to other states, several other states, counties aren't responsible for public school debt. They have independent school districts that issue debt on their own. So in those states, like South Carolina as an example, the school debt doesn't show up on the county's audit. So you kind of get a little bit of skewed data. So in this particular page, the North Carolina are particularly relevant. Next on your debt profile and debt ratios, page 19, this is debt service as a percent of governmental expenditures. Remember, your annual payment on debt for this tax-supported debt it's going to $6.5 to $7 million a year that you're spending on debt. So when we go through the math and the methodology, your debt to expenditures is about a little over 6%. You have a policy that says we don't want it to exceed 12%. Lower is better. You're in compliance. You have some room within this policy. And on a comparison basis in the upper right, you're in good shape. Lower is better. You compare not only well to the national counties, but you compare particularly well to the North Carolina counties. And remember, all of these include the debt we did last year for the school and the detention center, which was almost $26 million worth of debt. So we've got that fully baked in, and you still compare nicely. So lastly, page 20 is debt per capita. This is another policy that you all have. It says we don't want our debt per capita to exceed $1,000, so it's debt outstanding on a per person basis. You're basically at about $700 per person, and you can see in the comparison, particularly to the North Carolina counties, you're not an outlier one way or the other. You're in good shape. So I think on the debt, all of these things lead you to the same conclusion, is that you've been prudent in the use of debt. I don't believe you've overused debt. You've done it where appropriate, and when you've issued debt, you've issued it in a way that that shows good, rapid payoff, and it's being brought on at a level that is appropriate for your tax base and your budget size. And it's a strength for you all in your credit profile, and that was noted by the rating agencies.
And our policy is not to exceed 2%. How bad does that get in North Carolina, Fort County? What's the highest one you know?
Of the rated peers, you're getting almost, you can see the blue line, you're getting pretty close to 2%.
Yeah, so you don't see anything any worse than 2% in North Carolina?
You know, I think of a place, some counties down east that are very rural, don't have a lot of development, and have had to issue debt for a big school project.
Right.
That can be a situation where when that debt first comes on and not much of it has been repaid, you can start to get above the 2, maybe even 3%. But that would be a pretty unique situation where a place like that said, and we haven't done a school in many, many, many years, and it's a $30 or $40 million project. Right. The only way they're going to do it is with debt. And so you can find that maybe you get a little out of whack on a county level there. It's probably more prevalent where you get some higher numbers on the municipality side. Even though they're not funding debt, they might be funding enough other things.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay? I believe on that the state statute says not to exceed 8%. You would never get to 8%. Nobody would ever allow you to get to 8%.
They don't loan you the money, huh?
I don't think anybody will lend you that money. And it's a bit, I think it goes back to a day when in North Carolina maybe you only assessed at 50% of the market value or something. I think that was something that happened years and years ago. And then they started assessing at full market value, and they didn't change that. So 8% would have been, if they adjusted that when they changed the tax approach, it would have been 4%. Okay, page 21, so we talked about the debt ratios and the policies. You're in good shape. And I would say at a very high level, the county has debt capacity. Doesn't mean you should issue debt, and I'm not suggesting what it would be for schools or non-schools, but there is capacity where you could take on some debt within reason, not excessively, and still compare well, still be able to show compliance with your policies. But it also doesn't mean it's affordable. And so what page 21 is trying to do is to demonstrate for y'all
how you go about budgeting for capital. And as I said at the very beginning, there are a number of things going on in your operating budget that are not included here, but this is just your capital. And I think this is an area of strength for you all. So if you bear with me and you look at this page starting on the left, everything is on a fiscal year basis. Column B is the existing debt service that you've already committed to, right? We've already accounted for that. So it's year by year. What are you paying on your debt? Column C is where we're going to show you new debt that could come on. It's blank right now because we're only dealing with your existing debt. So columns D, E, and F are pay-go funding levels for the county, the schools, and the community college. And in fiscal 22, you can see what those amounts are, right? $1,007,000, $1,003,000, and $415,000. We have continued those out every year at the current level. Now, we know that may vary. It may bump around a little bit depending on what those departments or those entities request. But I think the important discussion here is twofold. One, that I would call it a pretty significant level of pay-as-you-go, right? And which is one, it's a positive. You're investing in those organizations or facilities, and it's being paid for from current year revenues largely. And part of what hopefully this plan allows you to do is acknowledge and be comfortable that you can continue to fund some level of pay-as-you-go year over year going forward. So what we've got running through this model right now is the debt that you've committed to under B and certain level of pay-go funding for schools, county, and community college. And those are summarized or added together under column H. That is the payments that would be due, if you will, for debt and capital. Okay? The middle of the page, columns I through N, are all the sources of funding that you budget to support those activities. And I think you can go back to your budgets and you can find all of these things. It's a very disciplined approach. You've got under column I, you've got a general fund appropriation of about $2.3 million. Column J, you've got restricted sales tax, which is primarily associated, with school capital and debt service. K is the lottery money. As Donna said earlier, the General Assembly reinstated lottery funds for the grant recipients. And you're right, we heard from them. They did confirm that it's in the current FY22, you're going to start getting that for sale or distributions that occur starting on October 1 of 21. They indicated it's a little late, but the first distribution should be coming soon. So it's Q2, 3, and 4, I believe, for FY22. So column K is an acknowledgement that that's going to be reinstated partially in fiscal 22, and then it's $1 million a year. Column L is some one-time revenues available for capital. That's footnoted. I think that largely comes from Edgecombe County in the, if I'm not mistaken, the school agreement where they support a certain percentage of school costs, 11% or something along those lines. And then M as in Michael is additional ongoing revenue available for capital that's in the budget. So when you take columns I, J, K, L, and M, those are different buckets of money, revenues coming in. We sum those up under column N as in Nancy. So then what you end up with is you got column H, which is the payments due. Column N are the revenues identified. And we compare those in column O. And you'll see we've got a little bit of a shortfall in the first 2 years, but then we go positive. And the shortfall in the first 2 years is covered, if needed, from a capital reserve fund that you have way over in column T. It's about $2.5 million. That is money you have set aside over the years for capital. So it's separate and apart from your fund balance, that unassigned fund balance. So if you look at this and think of it, you got to pay your existing debt service, and if you acknowledge that there will be continued investment in PAYGO, if you can continue to budget these sources of funding like you have historically, and you've got a little bit of reserve over here in a capital reserve fund, this entire debt and pay-go plan is paid for on a sustainable fashion because you start under column O to add money back to the reserve beginning in fiscal year 24. So everything that you've got here is paid for, and if you can continue to budget the way you have been, under column O, you're going to see you start to have some additional resources that would help you afford additional capital investment going forward as you decide year by year what you might want to fund. Does that make sense? Yep. That's the starting point. And so what I would suggest is we have one more page, 23, that starts with that premise that you're going to continue to be able to budget the way you've budgeted, and you're going to pay your existing debt as well as the pay-go. And we've backed into, or we've set up 3 cases. These are hypothetical. There are lots and lots of different cases we could do, but this we felt like was maybe a place to start. So when you look at case 1, all we are doing here is we're saying, how much more debt could we issue for capital needs without having, and how quickly could we do it without having to add more dollars to that debt budget, right? So it's not asking any more dollars to be dedicated to that debt plan that I just talked about. It's working within the dollars that are already in there. And case 1 says, how much more could we issue and when if we wanted to maximize what's in that model? And you'll see off the bat, you could do a little over $9 million. Then you're kind of on hold for a few years, and then you start to have some additional capacity. It's leveraging off those surpluses on that prior page, column O, right? If you keep budgeting the way you have, O starts to generate dollars, and that's what we're trying to leverage here. So hypothetically, we just picked the next decade, right? We got to stop it at some point for the analysis. There's about $43 million worth of debt that could be issued within that model, but it's largely backloaded, right? There's a little bit up front. There's some years where you're sort of on hold, and then it starts to ramp up again, and it's a little bit more backloaded on fiscal years 31 and 32. Done another way, again, not a recommendation, just another way to look at it, is case 2, the same basic idea, except we said, realistically, we're not going to probably do it the way case 1 would be. What is a little more metered way to do this year by year or every other year? And so we purposely solved for a levelized issuance every other year over this same time frame, and it gives you about $21 million. Now, if you keep going, you'll see that even case 2 starts to pick up more capacity. But we figured, let's just look at the 10-year horizon. Ultimately, what's going to drive these scenarios is we would move from the hypothetical to, here's our CIP. It's a 3-year CIP or a 5-year CIP. It's got projects and it's got amounts, and the discussion will be what happens if we try to fund it exactly like the way it shows up in the CIP, and we'll determine whether or not that's affordable, and then you start tweaking from there. Maybe something needs to be moved up a year, moved back a year. So this would ideally evolve, and it has before with you all. We just felt like today we were better to talk about it hypothetically than trying to necessarily model a specific capital plan. That might be the next step as you get further down the road with your capital plan and you figure out what some realistic scenarios might be. So this just kind of gives you a range. Lastly, case 3 says how much capacity is in that model if we don't do any debt and we just do pay-as-you-go, additional pay-as-you-go. So the dollars are lower. There's not as much. It's about $11 million over the same time frame. And it's just sort of the other end of the spectrum. Rather than maximizing the debt issuance, what could we do if we did only pay-as-you-go? So just, again, a little bit of perspective. The likelihood is you fall somewhere in between all of these cases, driven by what the real request will end up being from your department head. Yes, ma'am.
In case number 1, the numbers in the annual column, Did those numbers come from anything specific that we had identified in the past?
No, none of these did, no. They're
Okay.
it's just the model saying, how much can we issue and when without bringing any more dollars in there? So it's completely unrelated to any project whatsoever. If it looks like a project, it's purely coincidental.
This interest rate here, is that set?
Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, we've done a 20, when we've made assumptions about the debt, we've done it over a 20-year payback, which is typical of what the LGC would want to see for a real asset. Vehicles or something, you would do a shorter term loan. We've used 5%, which is, even though we've seen increases in rates, we're still probably a couple percentage points higher than the current market. You might be at 3% today, but also remember this analysis looks out over 8 or 10 years. So we've got some cushion there at 5%. It's a planning rate. If you were in the market today for 20-year loan, you would be under 3%. But because this analysis goes out several years, I guess just a little bit of conservatism by using a higher assumed planning rate. And the last thing I'd say at the very bottom, under any of these scenarios, you would be able to continue to demonstrate that you would be in compliance with your policies. So I think the takeaway, although it's hypothetical amounts and timing, you could afford to do all of this if you continue to budget the way you've been budgeting, keep the same amount of dollars in that model, and you could do it and continue to demonstrate compliance with your policies. So it's the capacity is there, the affordability is there. Now I think the discussion evolves to what is it that the list really looks like, and helping y'all make decisions about what's in year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, prioritization, and if the list of projects is more than you can afford by paying cash every year, then you might need to consider debt, and if so, that's where this can be refined. That's all we had.
All based on maintaining our present tax rate.
For capital. So if there's something going on in your operating budget that could have an impact on your tax rate that wouldn't
No, but your
impact
projection is
this.
based on that we maintain.
Yeah,
the
the answer is
parent.
yes. I think what's an important question, if you go back to page 21, what this is really predicated on is not a particular tax rate, but that we can continue to budget and recognize or collect all of those dollars in columns I, J, K, L, and M. Now you could equate that to how many pennies on the tax rate, but what's key to making this work is that those dollars materialize.
Okay. Outside of the tax rate.
Well, some of this is paid for by your current year tax revenue, real property and or sales tax or other revenue. But as I said, there could be things going on in your operating budget that could drive tax rates higher or allow you to reduce tax rates. This model working the way we had intended to, what it requires is the dollars, however you choose to get those dollars, whether it's from a real property tax rate or some other revenue. Not sure it's kind of a subtle difference, but there are places, just hypothetically what we're doing, there are places that say, look, part of our budgeting process for capital is we dedicate 10 pennies towards debt and capital. That's a model where if they can't dedicate 10 pennies, if they choose to reduce the tax rate, they still got to dedicate the equivalent of 10 pennies. So it's just, everybody budgets a little differently. I think what's just the important thing is we need these dollars to continue to be budgeted in order for those cases to work, however you choose to generate those dollars out of your budget. Okay?
Any more questions for Mr. Cole?
I got a couple I want to ask, and then I want to regress back to Ms. Wood for just a moment. Would it be a fair summary of your presentation that Nash County has a strong financial picture with strong management and strong policies and procedures?
It would, yes.
Thank you. That would be my thinking as well. The next thing I wanted to mention, and something I'd heard on the news recently, and it relates to services that counties provide. And you may not know this answer, somebody in the room may know it, but our tax base is a little over 8.1 billion. What is, just for comparison, what is the tax base in Wake County, which has over 10 times our population?
I can check it. I think it's over 40 billion.
40
billion. If
40
you're at
big.
8 billion, and I'll double check this, I
Okay.
might have it in my book.
Yeah, because I hear from time to time services provided in Wake County, and people wonder why those same services at that level cannot be provided in our county. So I'd like to know that number just for my own information. And now I want to regress back a moment. On page 12 of the report, the Davenport report, I believe it gives me the year-to-year number that I asked you for, Ms. Wood. So I'm good with that. You don't need to worry about grabbing that information from me. I've got it. Next thing I wanted to just get in the mix, because I thought about it as we were presenting all this. We talked about things that may or may not be in the current 16+% over the revenue year to year. Does that include public schools in terms of any general requests they make, or the supplemental increase that we are considering?
No, what we have in the requested budget is the operating that we provided in fiscal year '22,
Okay.
the same dollar amount, and the same dollar amount of capital.
Well, it's the same dollar amount with the less population, so it's really...
Absolutely.
Okay. So there's nothing in there that covers that possible supplement increase, which I think there's a general feeling of support for that, at least on my behalf it is as well. How about broadband?
It does not, we have that in a separate.
So it's covered?
We're looking at using ARP money to use with
But
broadband.
does that ARP money, is it going to cover the cost that we've got to put into it, all of it? Okay.
Should.
How about the detention facility? When that facility is completed, we're looking at 24 to 25 additional staff. Is it in that money?
It is.
It is in there. Okay, good. Very good. Okay, I'm good. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Cole? Well, we thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very
Appreciate it.
informative, and we hope that you'll be able to stay around for lunch with us if you can do that.
best.
And but thank you. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
The next item on our agenda is actually on page 3. It's our Nash County Miracle Park at Coopers, Phase 2, fiscal year '22, the current year that we're in, general fund appropriation, and Phase 2 master plan design and approval. This is actually an item that we would like to ask the board to take action on today. And Thomas, do you have the cover sheet? Did you just want to start, or do you want me to? Okay.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank y'all for having me and Patsy present this. The Nash County Park Committee has continued to meet and plan for Phase 2 at the Nash County Miracle Park at Coopers. At the moment, staff is finalizing a grant application from the North Carolina Parks and Recreation Trust Fund that is due on May 2nd, 2022. In order for us to receive 3 points in the Part F grant application, the project must be included in the county CIP for fiscal year 22. So after receiving cost estimates from Stocks Engineering, the total Part F grant request is $425,000 with a total local match of $427,000. The total estimated cost for Phase 2 is $852,000. So in addition, the final master plan design for Phase 2 has to be approved to receive additional points as well for the grant application. And Patsy has passed around the final site plan for Phase 2, along with on the back is the proposed elements and costs as well. Our staff is here today respectfully requesting the board to amend the current year CIP to include $427,000 local match in year 2023 for Nash County Miracle Park at Cooper's Phase 2 and approve the master plan design for Phase 2. I'm willing, Patsy and myself are willing to entertain any questions that you may have. Yes, ma'am.
Does this include lighting for the baseball fields?
No, ma'am. Lightings for the baseball field was, it's gonna be in a separate phase due to the expense.
So I understand right now that the, most of the baseball teams, the way our county schedule is right now, can't play there because there's no lighting. Most of those games are played during the week in the evenings.
So at the moment, we just, since daylight savings came in, I think it was last week, the teams that are based out of the Coopers area are starting to practice there, and we will have games there this spring season. It'll be tough during the fall, but now that we've transitioned to the daylight saving time, our teams will be practicing there this spring.
Good, thank you.
Yes, sir.
One question. On an issue that's related to the park but not a part of this, is the paving of the parking and the entrance road in a separate discussion? Or
I actually have that on the fiscal year 23 CIP request.
okay, so that's in the CIP that we're going to go over?
Correct.
Okay, so without any other questions, then I'd move for approval of this request.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
A second. Open it up for questions at this time. I have one for Mr. Wood. Does this come strictly out of fund balance?
This does come out of fund balance.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? All in favor of the motion, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed by a like sign? Motion carries, sir.
I think back to Ms. Leggett's point about lights. I know that's a big expense. So at some point, it'll probably happen. But I think we also had to move out the splash park. It's not a part of this, is it, or is it?
The splash pad is
So that
not
would be in Phase 3?
Yeah, so if you look on the document, Stocks identified future facilities.
Turn your site plan over there with budget.
Yeah, the things that we discussed.
Yeah, so that's, I think it's highlighted in orange for future
At the
facilities.
public meeting we had.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we narrowed it down in the
Right.
teleconference that we
That's
had
right.
to come up with this list right here.
But we got the bandstand.
Correct.
Good.
I'm wondering if this is the appropriate place to ask, time, rather, to ask this question. I'm thinking about the other parks. I know maintenance would probably be in the regular budget, but if there's any plan for expansion in the parks that we already have, like Red Oak, Bailey, Middlesex, Castalia.
Well, those other parks are owned by the municipalities.
So they are completed. Those parks are completed with everything.
I know Red Oak is looking at adding additional acreage to their park for some passive recreation, and we actually had a meeting with Mayor Lou Harvey Lewis last week about discussion for developing the rest of the acreage at Bailey Middlesex Community Park. So it's discussion in place for those other parks that are owned by the municipalities.
And for instance, Castalia has some additional land as well, and they may want to do something in the future. So there's other possible expansions out there.
And there's possible grants that you could apply for,
Yes,
for
sir.
that also, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. My suggestion is let's stay on top of it so we won't have nothing crashing in us all at once.
And we're also looking into, as far as the lights for Miracle Park at Cooper's, we're looking into find other sources of funding for those lights as well. So we're just waiting to hear back from some vendors and other sources of funding agencies that we reached out to. Any more questions for Patsy or myself? Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas and Patsy. That was the last item that we had on our agenda prior to lunch. We've invited the department heads to come and have lunch with you all before we get into the afternoon, where they're going to present their capital improvement requests, as well as their positions, their new positions and reclassifications of positions. Those requests will be presented this afternoon. And I'm not sure that our lunch is quite here yet, so if we could just go ahead and take a break, and we will let you know when the lunch is ready. Did you see something?
Anything real quick below that line?
There's not.
There's not, okay.
Nope, nothing we can plug
Go with your
in.
plan then.
Nothing we can plug in.
Okay.
Stretch your legs.
Okay.
I do have a clarification. Wake County's tax base, I was way off, 160 million. Billion, 160 billion.
160 billion.
So 20 times.
20 times.